Welcome to Dan's Talks. My guest today is Judge Bernard Graham, um, who is a surrogate judge in Brooklyn and lives on Shelter Island. And I thought it would be interesting because Shelter Island is so different. And I thought that who better to judge it than a judge?
Well, good
So
morning, Dan.
I thought,
Uh,
uh, so the
Hold
first,
on, want to interrupt you because I actually live in Brooklyn, but we have a home on Shelter Island.
yes, I know, but that's the sort of the point. It's like there's such a different, what, for example, in Brooklyn, well, you're in the city but it's, do you go to Nets games, by the way?
Or I was at one last week. Big
I
Net.
thought they played the Thunder because they have a great basketball player now.
They lost to Minnesota, which is a really strong team, but they only lost by a point or two last
Oh,
week.
but you can't do that when you're on Shelter Island.
No, there's not a lot of major league athletics.
Tell us how you came to have a house here in Shelter Island rather than either on the North Fork or in West Hampton. Did you look around? And how long ago was it?
Well, my family, for whatever reason, my father was aware that the Hamptons had some beautiful farmland. And in 1968, he was a civil rights lawyer, not making a great deal of money, but my mother and he came out and they bought three-quarters of an acre in Wainscott.
Probably for $5,000.
Yes, it was very reasonable back then. And we were south of the highway, and they then leveraged the land to get a loan to build a house. So we had a home in Wainscott for a number of years, and that was our beginning on Long Island. And that continued until about 1980. Uh, Over the years, we went off to college and separate ways. My father passed away, and my mother then decided that she really liked Shelter Island. We would rent houses on Shelter Island in the 80s. I was graduating from law school, and we would have a number of Brooklyn families share a big rambling house in Shelter Island for about $2,500 for the month. And we had a great time because it hadn't exploded with all this new interest and popularity that it has now. And we've been there ever since. We then decided, well, my mom and the rest of us to buy a house, and we have a little house that we've had for almost 20 years now.
How could it have changed in a way? That's an odd question because I remember it too, years and years ago, and it was so quiet. And but there's still only one way on and off it, which is ferry boats.
So
And
right,
I,
but on either side of the island.
well, they're on both sides of the island, but it seemed the only thing I could figure out, because now it is busier. It's not anywhere near as busy as the Hamptons, but it is much busier than it was. It was so peaceful back then. Um, and the only thing I could figure out is that the ferry boats got bigger and took more frequent trips. But even so, what do you like to do on Shelter Island?
Well, you have to make your own fun on Shelter Island.
Yes.
A limited number of restaurants and venues, a lot of which shut down after Labor Day. So you really have to enjoy the peace and quiet and being with your, bringing out your friends and family, uh, doing things. Uh, in my case, a number of families grew up together with their kids, and we have a book club that meets, and we, share birthdays and holidays out there. So we've been very happy with it. Our kids have all worked in the restaurants, So that attaches us to the island, and but it's not the Hamptons, at least not yet. And I think having the ferries has a way of tamping down some of the potential growth that it could turn into, like a Montauk or something, because people just don't want to deal with having to get on a ferry and then have to worry about getting back on the ferry. So it does tamp things down. So you have to really want to be there, and that's good for us, I think.
Um, so, but for a long time there were there was a group of you. How many were you in that group that had rented in that big house?
There were at least three families and some of those houses in the Heights were, real rambling Victorian homes with, 7 or 8 bedrooms. And, it all worked out. We had people, each family would have a number of kids would come out and sleep on the couches. And, we made a go of it. Being from Brooklyn, we're very hardy and we're resilient.
Do you fish at all, or have any sports you play out here?
Well, I'm a tennis player and a golfer, and there's plenty of that. There, a lot of my associates or friends are into fishing. There's a lot of nature-based activities, bike riding. We see people doing yoga on the beaches now. People are very health conscious. So there's a lot to do in the warm weather.
Gardiner's Bay is a beautiful course. Do you play that?
I do, but I only go. My wife and I are house members, and it has gotten somewhat expensive to be a golf member there.
Yes.
And I'm, a public servant, and I don't live there year round, so I haven't really had that pressure to join. But I did join the Goat Hill Country Club, which you may or not be aware of, is the local 9-hole municipal course favored by more of the locals.
Is that near where I don't know if it's still there, but there was a grass strip for airplanes coming and going.
No, that's the other end of the island. That's the airport.
Huh.
Goat Hill is not far from the Heights. It's on a higher elevation, and it does have a cedar shingled bar restaurant at the top of the hill.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's a quirky type of thing that it's nice to have because it's very affordable and anybody can play there. It doesn't have a lot of attitude or anything.
Where did you grow up, and when did you decide you wanted to become a lawyer?
Well, I was growing up in Brooklyn, and both of my parents were lawyers. That didn't have any real bearing originally on my desire. I wanted to be a doctor, and I was fascinated. I would read a lot of books about heart transplants and things like that. And I went to Stony Brook University thinking that was the place to go. And the biology 101 class had about 800 students in it.
Wow.
And on that first day, I said, you know what? This isn't going to work out. I'm here to have a kind of broad education and a little fun at the same time. And I said, you know what? These people aren't going to come out of their rooms for 4 years. So I switched gears, became an economics major, and law school was a very good option considering it was pretty much in my family and in my DNA. And I haven't regretted it at all. I've had a wonderful career as a judge and as a private attorney. It can do a lot of good.
How did you get to be a judge, and why did you want to be one?
Well, I had a storefront law practice in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and I was very much a man of my neighborhood, my community. I was involved with the YMCA and the civic associations and doing a lot of wills and real estate matters. And then I fell in with someone who became a good friend who was the borough president of Brooklyn. And we actually met him on Shelter Island at the Ram's Head. He happened to be out there he liked to go out there on weekends, and we didn't know him at all. And I said to my wife, you see that guy over there, Marty Markowitz? He's he's going to be the borough president. And let's go say hello. And she said, oh, no, let's not bother him. And I said, no, I think he'll like it. So we go over, and he was overjoyed to see someone recognize him on Shelter Island. And that then became the start of a very nice friendship. And he knew that I was working as a lawyer, and he thought it would be a good move for me to become a judge. And since I was so well known in my area, I agreed to do it, and it turned out to be a real competitive race. That's a whole nother story that would take a long time, but I did prevail, and that was the start of my career back in 2005. And that was the lower civil courts, which are the lower courts handle a lot of the smaller matters, small accidents and small claims and all of that. And then from there went to family court, because that was a little more exciting, and it certainly was. And then from there, I went to Supreme Court, where the matters are more significant and the trials were more meaty. And I was doing all kinds of things, including medical malpractice cases, which was very, very interesting. And then what happened was, about a year and a half ago, the surrogates court, what we would call a probate court, became very dysfunctional between COVID and some mismanagement, and people weren't getting their estates probated, and grandma's house wasn't getting sold, and people's property were going into foreclosure. So I was asked to step in. And then the next thing I knew, I was asked to run for the position because they needed some real help. And I was just elected in this past November in Brooklyn, which is a big accomplishment because it's borough-wide, 2.5 million people, and nobody ran against me, which was a good sign.
How does this court differ from, is this an appeals court? Tell me a little bit about this court, as apparently it's an appeals court from the Supreme Court of New York.
No, it's not an appeals court. We say we have equal jurisdiction on the same level as Supreme Court, but our mandate is probate of wills and administration of estates specifically, and as well as guardianships for incapacitated persons. And there are only 2 judges, and we have a staff of about 50 clerks and lawyers, and we settle everyone's estate, and they may have disputes over their wills and any number of fights over who should get the inheritance, but it's all limited to those areas that involve estates and surrogates practice, trusts, and it's a busy court because, of course, the volume, and now all of a sudden there's a lot of wealthier people in Brooklyn, and property values have gone up, so there's a lot of going on.
And is that a 9 to 5 thing, Monday to Friday, pretty much?
Yeah, we don't work remotely. We're in the office every day. And sometimes we work beyond 5 o'clock, because we have just a mountain of documents that need to be reviewed, doing hearings. I did a jury trial, which is somewhat rare, but some family where they disputed whether the mother had made a will of her own intentions, and they were alleging undue influence. So that was a very dramatic kind of contest that the jury was very, very invested in getting to the right result. And so we do have our drama and our human elements there.
Can you talk about, without mentioning any names, of course, but I thought it might be interesting if you told us a little bit about a particular case that you thought was fascinating, because I'm sure it would fascinate everyone to hear about it.
Well, we have a lot of fascinating cases. One of the things that's going on is there is a lot of unscrupulous developers who swoop in and they can purchase one of the relatives' shares of the inheritance, and that's fine and that's legal, but they do it for all the wrong reasons. They're stymieing or interrupting the probate of the will for the purpose of strong arming the other relatives to transfer their shares over. And this is really a very unethical, unscrupulous thing that goes on. And they interfere with the sale of what could be a $2 million brownstone in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And those cases came to me, and I had to, size it up, and it all becomes very technical in the probate world as to the power of an executor to handle the assets of the estate versus one of the beneficiaries. And so I enjoyed basically straightening that out and telling this developer that no, you cannot do that. You're enjoined. The executor has to have the power to represent the estate and sell the property. And for whatever reason you're doing this has to stop. So, and that's something that it wasn't a one-time deal. There's a number of these situations going on.
Is that and you stop it because they only have a minority interest, because they're one of many?
And they're not the fiduciary, or what we would call the executor. So they're the tail wagging the dog, and
Right.
they're trying to interfere with the process. So
Yeah. In my work for years, of course, I got to know a lot of the merchants with the paper, and I witnessed a number of major, I guess you call them retail places in the Hamptons, where although I don't know the details, things are gone into a situation where there are children who now own it, and they get into disputes, and the property then deteriorates because there's tenants in it.
Well, those are the type of issues that complicate the estates.
Yeah.
And if the court isn't on top of it, like you say, they languish, and the property can start deteriorating. And there's a lot of room for people to make objections and to hire lawyers to, slow down the process. We face that every day, and we try to, steer it in the right direction. I'll tell if you don't mind, I'll tell you one more interesting thing that just happened recently. That a family that was fairly well-to-do, and unfortunately the father passed away of a heart attack in his mid-40s, and his will, which he had made with his wife, left everything to his child after, if the wife was not alive. And he forgot then that later on he had two other children, which created an issue where it was close to $10 million. And the wife, he had divorced the wife, so it was very important where that money would go. And the will drafter didn't allow for later born children. So we had to have a whole hearing to say whether that was an error or not. And there was a lot at stake because, that was an attorney's error, as it turns out. But on paper, it would look like one child would get $10 million and the other two would get nothing.
Well, how did these other children become part of the estate? Were they from the mother, or had?
They were born to both mother and father while the parents were married. And the will was made on 1 year, but at that time there was only one child,
Oh, so the others weren't mentioned.
weren't mentioned, and therefore would be left out.
So how did it wind up?
Well, you have to have a hearing and you have to get testimony from the lawyer as to what the intention was. And the wife testified as well. And as it turned out, everybody was, willing to admit that that was a mistake. So
Yeah,
I then get to make the decision that, yes, the evidence shows it's a mistake, and we reform the will so that it's spread out amongst the three children.
I
But we
see.
have to do that legally, because otherwise it would have stood on its own terms.
I'll tell you, I was just thinking about something along these lines that I would just want to tell you about. It's so amazing. When I first started the paper, this is 60 years ago. I went to see a guy was building a building on Main Street in Montauk, and he was running a taxi business out of it, and he took an ad in the paper. And the next spring, when I went to see him, he told me that that he had been shut out by another taxi company making deals with some of the motels in town and the railroad station, and that he was so angry he was shutting down, and he would never ever come back to Montauk, and everything would just fall apart, and the building would go into complete decay because he was mad at that town.
Hmm.
As a 21-year-old kid, I was like, wow. So I watched this happen, and that building is still there in deteriorated state right on Main Street 60 years later.
How about that?
Isn't that something?
Yeah, well, life, people are unpredictable at times.
Yep. Well, thank you for being on this podcast, and I appreciate it very much. And I hope you have a nice day. And do you plan to, are you thinking about retiring yet, or are you just getting underway?
Well, I was just elected to this spot, and it would normally be a 14-year term,
That's good.
but I have to retire at 70, which is 7 years away. So I know what my timeline is.
See,
And if I can put in a public service announcement, all your listeners should really think about preparing a will and letting everybody know who their relatives are, because that's the problem that we run into in surrogate's court. That's my good deed for the day, Dan.
thanks for being on the podcast again.
Pleasure. Keep up the good work. I enjoy your paper.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.